With us today is William H. Murray, and Bill is going to be talking about professionalism. And Bill, why don't you take it away? I'll be listening with both ears today.
Good morning. Some of you may recall the editorial that I did a couple of weeks ago in which I asserted that every network system or application that one connects to the public networks, either the PSTN or the internet, becomes part of the infrastructure, and as such must be built to infrastructure standards. That means that, among other things, it must not fail in the face of easily anticipated abuse or misuse, and certainly should not fail under normal load. We should be building these systems for the ages, and we should be separating the controls intended for the management of the infrastructure from those for the users of the infrastructure. I suggested that since early Roman times, when the engineers were made to stand under the bridge while the army marched across, the engineering profession has adhered to this infrastructure standard. My suggestion elicited the following response from one of our colleagues, quote, "The comments you make on building infrastructure definitely do apply to physical infrastructure, as we have engineering disciplines backing them up, tables of materials and strength, etc. For information infrastructures, there is no software engineering discipline, no table of strengths, no standard components, etc. Carnegie Mellon University does a great presentation on this. Also, when you build a bridge, the builder cannot go onto the bridge and turn off the warning lights or take down the guardrails. Whereas webmasters, database administrators, sysadmins, network admins do so routinely on the information infrastructure." Close quotes. True. Indeed, all too true. However, the implication is that our responsibility is rooted in and limited by our tools, materials, and capabilities, rather than by what we are doing. Said another way, it's as though it is enough for us to say, "It's just too hard." Come on, guys. Not even craftsmen, much less any other professionals, use such an excuse. In craft, we say a good craftsman does not blame his tools or his materials. In IT and IT security, we have become so accustomed to blaming others, our tools, our materials, our users, and even our principals, those who pay us, that not only do we not notice, but others accept our excuses. I acknowledge that the problems, not to say the excuses, that my colleague notes, they're all true. This is not the first time I've heard these arguments. I've heard them all over the years. However, to try and carve out an exception for ourselves among all the other professionals simply does not advance the practice. I'm not willing to accept that we are doing the best we can. I hope that you're not either. Let me give you a counterexample. Aeronautical engineering. I submit to you that their problem is at least as difficult as ours. They put together millions of heavy parts, load them up with tons of fuel, freight, and hundreds of passengers, and operate them at 35,000 feet in the air. They call that normal load. The operators of their products do make changes late and have been known to misuse them, to misoperate them. But they are designed and built to resist controlled flight into terrain. Note that they are designed to resist easily anticipated abuse and misuse. Although on 9/11, what could be easily anticipated changed. Up until that time, we had not easily anticipated that a group of passengers would attempt to rush the cockpit and take over the airplane. Now we do. I'm not prepared to claim that our problem is anywhere near as difficult as theirs. Cross my heart. Some of us really do make such a claim. They point out that all airplanes have a fuselage, 2 wings, an elevator, a vertical stabilizer, and fewer than 10 engines. Said another way, we claim that we have an infinite number of degrees of freedom, while they have a finite and limited number. Of course, the problem is not so much that we have more degrees of freedom as it is that the engineers are prepared to give up some of those degrees of freedom in an attempt to achieve quality, consistency, and reproducibility. Neither am I willing to admit that we are smarter, that they are simply smarter, or more skilled than we are. The difference is that they are more professional than we are. They have a different culture, dedicated to quality, to safety, a culture that is intolerant of shoddy. They supervise their juniors, sign their work, and cherish their brand. Their customers take the quality of their results for granted. They consistently put us to shame, and I use that word advisedly. I do not intend to suggest that the engineering culture is simply a matter of attitude, or that it was easily attained. It clearly wasn't. It took centuries to get there. It's rooted in their education and in their curriculum. For example, it is not an accident that every engineering freshman takes a course called Strength of Materials. Not only does this course measure the strength of novel materials, give him standards of materials that are in use, but it also teaches him how to measure the strength of novel materials. It teaches how to determine the requirements of an application and what the limits are of what can be done with current materials. We build all kinds of bridges, tunnels, and skyscrapers in the 21st century that could not have been built in the 19th century with the materials that were then available. I do want to suggest that our culture, or lack thereof, is rooted in our attitudes. Attitudes that glorify the autodidact, the hacker, over those who are formally educated and who respect their history, their heroes, their science, their mentors, and their masters. For example, it's possible to get a 4-year degree in software engineering without ever having heard of Dijkstra or Deming, much less Aiken. It's not possible to get a degree in aeronautical engineering without learning why the DC-3 is still in operation after 75 years. One can get a degree in computer science without understanding how Windows and Unix got to look the way they do, or without being able to compare iOS to Android. Indeed, our values are so warped that many, not to say most of us, prefer Android to iOS. We award degrees to those who do not even know the meaning of a finite state machine or know the name of an example. You doubt me? Ask any of your CS graduates to compare OS 400 to Windows. It's rooted in our compensation system that rewards speed at the expense of quality and complexity at the expense of productivity. We would do well to remember the punitive measures that followed the collapse of the Firth of Tay Bridge. At some tipping point, society will lose patience with us, and we will not like the results. Many of us will no longer be allowed to work, and a few of us may even go to jail. Much of the generality and flexibility that we so value, but that my colleague notes is where the problem originates and persists, will be made illegal. For example, we may tighten iOS and outlaw Android altogether. Until now, I have resisted all attempts to regulate what we do from the outside. While I have advocated and contributed to professional certification programs, I have resisted any moves toward licensing. As the president says, my position is evolving. If these measures are to be taken, if we are to be licensed, then I would prefer that we lead it rather than having it forced upon us. Now, let me take one note about my analogy to the aeronautical engineering profession. Theirs is a licensed profession. It involves a whole lot of licenses. It's one of the few federal licensing programs. And it involves a whole lot of licenses granted to specialties. The license to pilot an airplane does not include the right to maintain it. And the license to maintain it does not include the right to fly it. We see that these licenses have evolved over a very long period of time, and they are very carefully crafted and maintained. We can do better. We will do better. We must do better. We will learn to do better because it is the right thing to do. We will do better because we will grow up. We will mature. We will bring ourselves at least to the standard of professionalism set for us by other professions, or we will be punished. To the extent that we are punished for doing the wrong thing, we will do less. And ironically, society will suffer with us. Just look at the cost to society of medical malpractice litigation. And the physicians are professionals. We are building infrastructure, and we must build to infrastructure standards. To do that, we have to become more professional than we are. If we are to be called professionals and be paid the big bucks, we must reform our attitudes, culture, practice, and our results. See you next week.
Great editorial, Bill. Thank you very much.